Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Marcus from TCG Discussions coming in with a Sakazuki guide. I just want to bring this to the channel because I watch a lot of players make what I would consider philosophical mistakes with the deck. This is obviously just going to be my opinion, so you can take it as you wish. But I've seen a lot of success playing the deck. And I think that some of the insights that I have to offer, because I've come from a different game where like advantage and value is basically everything, that could hopefully generate some tips and some things that I just see that are completely egregious that occur when I watch Sakazuki gameplay. This would be Japan's players that are in like top 16. So, or top 8, right? And I just things that I think philosophically go super wrong, and then it results in that player losing. And it's like, well, yeah, if you hadn't got rid of that one card back then, it would have impacted you later. One thing that we're going to cover specifically in this that is super important is the cycling effect with the leader in trash manipulation. And in this guide, we're also going to go over basically every meta matchup that you should run into and kind of like my thoughts and game plans and the best cards to see in those matchups. So let's get into it and start off with like the general game plan of the deck. So the general game plan of the deck is pretty straightforward. We're trying to remove our opponent's cards while cycling the worst cards out of our hand to get better ones and cards that help facilitate our game plan. The leader enables both on attack. He's able to reduce a card, and all of our cards are based on removal of reduction. Just to demonstrate the removers that are in my deck, immediately it would be these cards right here, and they are facilitated by all of our cost reducers. And I will get them out here for you right here. So basically all these cards are reducers in tandem with our leader, and we remove cards based on the board state, okay? Some things to note is that you can obviously apply pressure at other cards for removal while setting up your removal. So a common play would be swing into a 5-cost card with this, reduce something else. And like, for example, if they have like a blocker like Sanji, and I swing with this at a card, they may auto block with the Sanji. It happens a lot in order to not just lose the blocker's value of it getting removed. And they're like, oh, well, he wasted a tempo on that card. And I have cards all the time that make that tempo not matter, right? It can, but like in general, it's just a small thing to think about, right? Because you can put your opponent in a pretty bad position. Because if you get rid of the blocker and they don't get any value, and that one swing was the difference, like it might cost them. Let's start off with the most important card, probably in your deck for Playlines, and that's brand new. Okay, so brand new is a card that you definitely want to see. Best if you're going second. It's awesome to see him on curve because you're going to be able to not only add a card hopefully and simultaneously trash 2 cards. This is going to help you set up your play for Lucci and Manchuri if you need them, which has a lot of value. The primary turn 2 play is going to be either Barcelino or Kuzan. Sometimes if the board state's low enough and you cycle 1 card after seeing Brenna, you can play Lucci. Another common play is going to go into Hans Blaze. And then once you get to 6 Dawn or 5 Dawn, things start to get a little bit more crafty. So for example, even at 5 Dawn, if you have, for example, an Ice Age in your hand, your Ice Age plus Leader Swing can out a 4-cost card or a 6-cost card and a 3-cost card. Because your Leader Swing is going to reduce it down by 1, and then Lucci can get rid of whatever, or Hound's Blaze can help in that regard, and then you can put attack pressure when you need to. It's also really important to understand the high value of every single card in the matchup, and we're going to get into that when we get into the specific matchups. And when I say the specific matchups, I mean like literally anything that you should be running into in tournament. But that being said, and I'm like literally the best decks of every color. But that being said, the game plan right, is the facilitation of all of these cards and more in the deck, obviously, because I don't have every other card. And basically how you plan and craft the removal and your turn to set up for a pressure against your opponent, and what are some cards that you need to know are good against those matchups. Sakazuki is a very, very knowledge-based deck. If you have the wrong knowledge about the matchup, you're going to lose. If you have zero matchup knowledge, you're probably going to lose. And it's because you don't have that matchup knowledge, generally most of the time, that you don't you misplay and it ends up costing you. Another one is trash manipulation, making sure that you don't have enough cards in your trash. Cycling the wrong cards out of hand on cards that are way too valuable. So, like, for example, against, Gadatsu, right? If Katakuri is swinging at you on the first turn, you're down to 3, this card's now free of being Gadatsu, right? And this card on the board and its sheer presence against yellow, because it cannot be removed until they're 8 Dawn, and even at 8 Dawn, there may be something that they want to put back in their life or maybe more valuable, basically threatens anything that they have on the board as an instant -4. And if you can safely play a Kuzan while netting yourself another card and guaranteeing future removal, this card's huge. Between that and your leader, it's a 5 cost. Between that and your leader and Ice Age, it's a 10 cost, which is everything in the game. Ice Age plus Leader Swing plus Great Eruption is an immediate removal of any 10 cost in the game just by Hound's Blaze. So, because this is 5, 6, 2 more for Great Eruption, and then Hound's Blaze, and that's a total of 4 Dawn to remove a 10 cost card, which is ridiculous. But we also have Red Rock to make that a little bit more Dawn, less Dawn efficient, but in instant removal if we have it. So I'm not going to go through every turn, but just to kind of showcase an example. Also, Barcelino, which is this card. This is another little comment on note. Ice Age plus Leader Swing and Barcelino is also a removal of anything in the game. It's a 6 between Ice Age and your leader, and this hits 4 or less. So just some things to keep in mind. On to the trash, okay? I want to start off by talking about the cards that are just completely wrong to be trashy. Now, some of this is matchup dependent, but I'm mainly going to focus on 12 cards. And if you're cycling any of these cards at any time, unless you are completely bricked up in your hand with them, unless your hand is completely egregiously bricked, you should just never be cycling these cards under any circumstance. This is just, again, my opinion on the deck, but you can take it for what you will. So let's start off with the first 8. Tashigi and Tsuru. I said them backwards. I placed them backwards with Tsuru and Tashigi. Okay? There should be no time unless your hand is literally full of these cards, and even then it's kind of iffy. You should be cycling these cards out of your hand. If your hand's full of them, Tashigi is the best one to cycle. There's no problem with that. But it shouldn't be that way, right? You're not going to tell me that you drew 6 2Ks in your hand or 5 2Ks, right? That's just not really a thing. Even if it is a thing, wait till another card probably, right? Because there's going to be a lot of pressure coming down unless you have to just get to more cards quickly and you know that your opponent's deck is not going to allow you to do that, like against Rush Order or something. But these cards have way too much value, okay? And I see this all the time. I watch Japanese players. I can pull up VODs where they'll cycle Tashigi out of hand, and then the card that they draw is either an event card or a brick. I think one of the most egregious ones, and he lost, that I saw was him drawing Hina. And if he had just not cycled, period, kept it 2K, he wouldn't have lost the game. Literally, he would not have lost the game. That one card ended up screwing him because he couldn't get the Tashigi back, and he lost by a counter. So, these cards should never be cycled out of your hand at any point. It just doesn't matter the reasoning. There are some people who will be like, well, I have Hina in my hand, right? So I can always just get the Tashigi back with Rebecca and then play the Hina. Acting like having Hina in hand as a raw play is a good idea. No, you should always cycle the Hina out of hand. right? And not let your opponent know that you have a 2K. I can't believe I have to explain that, but like it's something that I see commonly on like VODs. The next card that is an absolute philosophically for me, right? I'm not saying that like, there isn't any other theory behind this, but is this card. There's almost no point in cycling this card. 99% of the time, you should never be cycling this card. Why? It replaces itself. Why on earth would you get rid of a card that is an auto replacement of itself? Again, unless your hand is like completely bricked up, there is no reason to cycle this card. Just none. Just none. Going on the trends of other cards that are pretty bad to cycle. Ice Age. Ice Age is one of the best cards against top end, period. And again, unless like your opponent's board is egregiously wide and you just don't have any removal to get rid of it, this card is going to come in eventually, right? So like if I draw Ice Age and I'm like, well, it's the worst card in my hand. And I'm talking about these in generalities if you have not bricked. Like if this was your first, what would this be? 15 cards and this is all you drew, obviously you should be cycling cards, right? I'm not like trying to come up with extreme niche scenarios. But in general, you should be never looking to cycle these cards. Just in general. Why? They are way too valuable in cost reduction, especially Ice Age. Like if you look at your hand and you say the worst card in my hand is Ice Age, don't cycle it, right? Unless you need to set up for something, which Ice Age is probably going to set that up anyway, because these 7 specifically right here, up top, they are cards that will go to the trash to help set up your trash on a play that you're wanting to make. So there's just almost no reason to put it there to hope to draw what? Ask yourself this question. If you know what you're going to play against your opponent, what is it that you're looking for? What could possibly be in your deck still that you would need to get rid of a card that for 1 Dawn reduces something by 5? Like, what could it be? Are you hoping to get the Hound's Blaze? If so, hopefully you have some other cards that have some good reduction for it, because this card alone plus your leader swing makes an 8-cost card negligible with Hound's Blaze. Same thing for a 7-cost. This card and that is Hound's Blaze plus making the leader swing at least 8, or something else on your board 8. For Rob Bellucci specifically, okay, the dude literally loves these cards. And as for your 2Ks, it should be pretty self-explanatory as to why you should not be just cycling out 2Ks at random. It's just it's egregious because you're going to need them to defend your life, and you don't have a lot of it. You have some recyclability with the Shigi between the Rebecca. That's it. So again, just these cards are all important reducers. Another thing that I see that is very bad is people playing Tashigi down. Tashigi should never come to your board unless you have no other way to reduce the cards. I have maybe, in all of my games of testing, played Tashigi down 3 times. I've played this deck a lot. I don't even know where it would be. Okay? 3 times. That's it. I'm not looking... you should not be looking to play this card. Sura, I play a lot more. Sura is understandable because she is a 1 Dawn for 2 reduction. But Tashigi is 3 Dawn, and you have to rest it for a 2 reduction, if I remember correctly. Yeah. It's just terribly inefficient. Even to set up, right? Even to set up future reduction with this card, it is still a card that should never be played to your board. Because why? You're going to lose the value if they get rid of it off of any effect. Especially like in the mirror. You have no value in playing Tashigi unless you're immediately using her effect. If she has no immediate use on playing the card, do not play the card just to play the card. And I'm saying this just to like more beginner. That's probably a more beginner friendly thing. But like, yeah. Let's go over cards that should be auto-cycled in the deck. Okay? Kuzan, if he is too late to play. Right? Unless there's absolutely nothing better to do with your 4 Dawn, you shouldn't be cycling. Him. Red Rock. Red Rock against certain matchups is just not going to be very efficient. Hina. There is never a time when Hina should not be cycled out of your hand. You draw Hina, this should be the first card out of your hand. Period. I won't even blink or think twice. Every card in my hand is better than Hina. Every single card. There's just no excuse. There is not a better card in my hand. I'm sorry, there is not a card in this deck that would be worse than Hina to have in my hand. Period. She is an auto cycle. Why? You get her back with Rebecca for free. She's a card that you should auto want to play for free every time. No ifs, ands, or buts. Moving on. In my list specifically, this is a card that you shouldn't cycle because it's at 1, but it comes up. But sometimes the math with him is going to be very funny. You just won't find an edge. Even if you don't want to cycle him, he could be a card that is counterpowered. So that's a little bit iffy. Games where you do not have time to play this card. You just know that you won't have time for it. Or like there's not enough defensive board states. Right? A card you don't cycle. This is a card you don't cycle. I don't understand why people feel like getting rid of this card. The only time I'm getting rid of this card out of my hand is if I have multiples of him. And there's not anything else that is before this card in this list to pitch. Now, I'm a little bit more hesitant with the Kaido because he's an secret rare that has a... that has like its playability in certain matchups. But that, again, is going to be a timing thing, whether or not you know you're going to have time in the matchup. Like in a slower, grindier game against an L, you resolve Kaido, you pretty much win the game. Actually, you resolve Kaido most of the time in this deck, and you're safe to do so, you pretty much win the game. Yeah. But Barcelino is a card that you should only be cycling when you have multiples of him in hand. This card. Right? If I have 2 of this card in hand and they've played Sabo, it's pretty bad. Should probably cycle the card. Cards to cycle. Brand new. Right? After your first couple turns, you shouldn't be raw playing brand new unless there's literally nothing better to do. Even then, brand new is probably going to be good in hand, but he does dig you 3 cards deeper into the deck. Another card on my list that I don't cycle. I play only 2 of him. Right? But if this card is truly the worst card in your hand and everything else is good in the matchup, you can cycle him. And the last card is Rebecca. Okay? Rebecca is a card that you can cycle only again, and she is at the far end of this. So from stretching from cyclability, it should probably look like something, the values from worst to cycle to easiest to cycle, and it just depends on the matchup, should look like this. Okay? Worst to cycle all the way up here, excluding the auto cycles. These are auto never cycles, okay? Aside from these 15 cards here, we should never be cycling these before any of these. And it should go in probably order from this side to this side. From least, like all these cards would be at this end, if that makes any sense. Want to cycle these cards? Do not want to cycle these cards. The more we go down this list. Okay? Now, why trash manipulation is important? Because this effect exists to pitch a card. I see people doing dumb stuff all the time. Like cycling 3 Rebeccas. Or cycling 2Ks. Or, you know, cycling the only Rob Lucci in their hand. Like, this card's not going to have value anyway. Right? Or, you know, their SCR, just because it's in their hand. Kuzan can still be a good second turn play. Especially when this card's in their hand. If I ever see a Sakazuki have a Hina in their hand, and they cycle any of these other cards, I cringe. And You're going to understand why in the matchup section here pretty shortly, but your grade manipulation is very important. Getting things set up for your Rob Lucci are really important. I'm not going to lie that. I'm not going to deny that whatsoever. But these cards are auto one-ofs that go to the drop. Your 2K counters are the cards that protect you and you want back in your deck. Okay? So I guess this is more of a why. Okay? Your Hina should be the card that you auto cycle, so she should be in there. Your Hound's Blazes are cards that you're going to play to get rid of your opponent's cards. And once you Hound's Blaze with Brennu on board, it's probably going to get attacked and die. And act as a blocker. Because they just don't want like you to get rid of a card, another card with Hound's Blaze, and then just absolutely floor them. And again, we'll talk about in the matchup section, basically where you kind of like what cards you want to see. And then you'll just see how often all these cards that you don't auto cycle are super important in the matchups. But I want to demonstrate something to you to show you the level of counter power. And this is kind of more of an argument philosophically about the 2Ks. Okay. How much counter power does the deck have? Okay, I'm fanning this all out in front of you so you don't see anything off screen. This is my entire deck. Make sure that there's nothing with counter power over here. I'm sorry, without counter power over here. I misspoke. Okay. That's over 50% of your deck is not counter power. When you cycle cards that have counter power out of your hand for no reason, 50% of your deck is a brick. The only time that you should be doing that is when you're looking for a piece that you need. If you just drew like basically all the cards that don't have removal on them. Right? That's the only time you should. In terms of cards that do have removal, let me make sure one more time. There isn't anything else over here. Make sure there's nothing over here. I don't believe that there is because, yeah, these are all either support cards or other things. It is a lot of cards, right? You have a lot of cards in this matchup, at least with my list, that have removal. A lot of people play like more Barcelino, so that's 12. 12 out of 50 of your cards, so over a fifth of your deck. You're going to see them in some tandem combination, okay? And then, furthermore, are the cards that replace themselves. So that would be this, these, these, her, and then lastly, Brennan. And this is really important to demonstrate how much you're going to dig through your deck at some point. Okay, Brennu is obvious. It doesn't hit every time. That's fair. Rebecca generally will. Mancherry is obviously going to replace herself. And something else to know with Rebecca, you can't add back Brennu, but you can play Brennu off of her. So, like, if you added 2K back to hand and play Brennu, you could just hit huge. This card needs no explanation. It's a freaking draw for. This card is obviously going to replace itself, and this card replaces itself. So you have all these cards that help you get closer in some way, probably to these, or recycle, like Rob Lucci, back to hand off Rebecca. So you can either draw into these cards or get them back. So that provides like a high level of consistency for the deck. Just to demonstrate, okay? Now, let's go into cost efficiency. Okay, so cost efficiency is like something that's really, really important with this deck. You have to craft every single turn the best way to remove cards possible, right? It's all dependent on the removal that you have in your hand. These being the sole focused 12 cards for our deck. Barcelino could be increased. Like you cut this if you want 3 Barcelino, but I personally don't, because when I play like Barcelino at 3, I just see nothing but Barcelinos like all the time. I also want Red Rock to immediately out a 10 cost card without me having to do this map. But this is about cost efficiency, right? At 10 cost, you're going to have to spend a lot of resources to get the card down, and Red Rock just completely answers that. The other thing that's also really important about Red Rock to note is that you can play Red Rock and play either Borsalino or Rebecca, which is massive, right? So if they spend 10 Dawn to Big Mom you, and then you spend 6 Dawn to get rid of it and play a blocker, depending on board state, that could be really good. Or if you need to like play like an Ice Age and a Great Eruption and on something or whatever, and then you need to get rid of like another high cost card with a Hound's Blaze, you may be able to do that as well. Okay. But Dawn efficiency is just always the most important thing with this deck. The things that people really don't understand is that like you obviously have a limited number of Dawn to make your play, so you always want to do the best thing possible every single time, right? You cannot just play Rob Lucci immediately, for example, because after swinging with leader once, you can get rid of a 2-cost card here, and then this card reduced a 2-cost card down to 1, so you should get rid of that, right? That just doesn't make any sense, right? Like to get rid of 2-cost cards. Let's say they play like a double Shira, like you swing at life, you reduce a Shira, and then they hit another Shira off life, and you had they had like a 4 or 5 cost card in their hand, and you have a Great Eruption, you have 5 Dawn, right? If they had a 4-cost card, you should definitely reduce the Shira by 1 that's on the board, play Great Eruption, and then play Lucci. It seems like that is a thing that should be obvious, but it's not, right? Because some people get sucked up in immediately like, oh, what is the card that like I should focus on getting rid of the most when it comes to that. And sometimes people mess up their math. Like, I'm not even joking. You can see this literally anywhere when you're looking at VODs online of like, oh, I'll play this against Sakazuki. And then like, can it beat Sakazuki? Can this deck beat Sakazuki? Or like this deck versus like the top 3 decks. And then you'll just watch and their opponent literally looks like they've never played Sakazuki a day in their life. And I'm not saying they're bad players. I'm just saying that they don't have the reps with their deck because they're trying to play Rob Lucci to KO a card that's not at 2 or less, or a solo card. Why would I get rid of, like, for example, let's say they have 8 cost Katakuri on board, and, let's just stick with that. And I have Ice Age and Borsalino in my hand. Okay? I have these 2 cards. If they have 8 cost Kata, I'm going to play Ice Age and bring it down to 3 and then just buy it with Borsalino. Right? Seems simple enough, but like I establish an 8K while getting rid of an 8K attacker while getting rid of your own. And instead sometimes, hey, if the math works, the math works. Like you might be able to play Rebecca into Hina, reduce it by 4. And then swing, reduce it by 5, or play a Great Eruption to reduce it down to 2. Great Eruption and then Hound's Blaze. That's a little bit overkill for an 8-cost card. You don't even need the leader swing, technically, if you run that play. But that's 7 of your 8 Dawn. And now you have a 6K swing that you may consider, right? And you replace the card in your hand with a Great Eruption. But those kinds of efficiencies are something that you're always looking to do with Sakazuki, and it's going to get more important again. And we're going to get to the section soon, but we talk about every single matchup. Okay, so I have here a list of basically every top deck in the game. Okay. And that would be anything that I think you should run into a tournament. And the list is very long, okay? And we're going to go by each color, starting with red, because I think it's like the biggest. So we have red, purple, Luffy, Zoro, red, green, Law, red, purple, Law, Whitebeard, Ace, and Bello Betty. So red, purple, Luffy. What is extremely important about red, purple, Luffy? So a few things to note about red, purple, Luffy is that this card is going to come in extremely clutch. Okay, I'm going to place basically only one ofs. Because red, purple, Luffy does not generally red, purple, Luffy does not generally spam a lot of cards to the board. It can, but it generally does not. Okay. So basically, all these cards are super important. If I place cards right here, basically they are the best cards against red, purple, Luffy. And then I will also explain why the other cards that are not a part of this pile, this card can be, are not. And then obviously the 2Ks. So basically I have one of every single card in my deck. These probably are the worst against red, purple, Luffy. These cards right here up the top are probably the best. We have Suru and Tashigi over here. I'll slide all this over a little bit. Okay. So why? Why are these cards where they are on this list? So 10 cost Kaido coming down if you get to 10 Dawn before then, which you won't. But 10 cost Kaido drawing you 4 cards just basically guarantees if you can get to it in the late game that they're not going to kill you. You're basically going to remove any card they play, and you should be saving your high cost removal for either blockers that they play, Ninebeard, or the take a turn Luffy. Okay. Your 2Ks are extremely valuable because they help you avoid taking pressure early. This card's super impactful. All your blockers are super strong because they basically make the high cost swings like 8 or 7. You get alleviated pressure by not having to deal with it. Rebecca is probably the best because literally get the worst value out of it. Like Barcelino and Sabo, especially being a 6K attacker, can still easily do pressure against them. That's also where Rob Lucci does get some value, but Rob Lucci doesn't get value unless they go wide with blockers or something. The reason why Hound's Blaze is super important is basically because Hound's Blaze can help you get rid of Zoro when they play them early. So you can swing with later in the bottom deck with Zoro. And if you saw brand new on curve, basically that means you can, so let's say you go second and they actually like to go first. And then they play down the Zoro and you saw brand new. You can swing 6 with brand new and then swing 7 with your leader. Putting them in range for Rad Beam for sure, but also at the same time, you got rid of their ramp, which is super impactful. So they're not going to get to their 10 Dawn turn or 9 Dawn fast for either Newgate or the Take a Turn Luffy. And you set them back that extra resource to be able to swing at your life, because they'll easily attach a Dawn to that if it means that they can swing at your life and ramp another Dawn. The reason this is good is for the top end. Barcelino is super strong because between Ice Age and this, basically all their blockers, like the Kid, if they play it, the Law, if they play it, and Great Eruption, again, you can get those cards down. It's super impactful there. Brandon is obviously good anytime it's early. I've already explained the blockers, and then the 2K counters. The reason why these cards are all bad, this card is basically like a resource regeneration, and you can play into Law, which can kind of hurt you. But she can help you get back key cards in the matchup, so it could be good. This card is basically only good off of Rebecca. She is insane when it comes to reducing high-cost cards, but this card would be better because not only did it replace itself, it's going to be a card that can still reduce those high-cost cards, but again, they don't get value. This card doesn't see as much value until they play And this card is generally not KOing multiple things unless they commit to a blocker board. Okay. So moving on to Zoro. Best cards in Zoro against Zoro. This card is terrible. Card is terrible against Zoro. Ice Age is honestly not that very good against Zoro. This card's not too good. This card's insane. This card is not. This card is not. This card is okay. This card is pretty good. And this card is okay. So this card is definitely better than this. These two cards, I'm going to start with what's terrible in here. These two cards right here are very bad because generally they, like, you'd be reducing most of whatever it is to 0. So these cards could technically be almost auto cycles if you have other forms of reduction. They don't play a lot of high cost cards, right? So you're not going to really need to worry about that. And philosophically, you can basically play all the things I'm talking about here for Zoro also apply to Red Green Law. You won't have time with this. So this card can also be an auto cycle out of your hand. Same thing, concept for both of these cards. The need to reduce them for the cost of what they are just basically are negligible. But she's a lot better. I will probably auto cycle Kuzan, but she's probably the best down here because of Rebecca. All these cards here are absurd against Zoro and Red Green Law. This is obviously the best one by far, not close. Simply because he's going to get rid of multiple bodies just off of his effect alone. Barcelino, because he's Barcelino. Hound's Blaze, I should just set all three of these right here. These three cards right here break the matchup. Like, you see these cards, especially Rob Lucci, you're doing well. This is better than Ice Age in the matchup, simply because it reduces a card smaller. So a 3-cost card like Rornor Zoro. And so, like, you could reduce the Zoro down to 1 and then KO the 2K guy, the Curly Dodon, right, with Lucci. So this way you're not having to deal with the Zoro plus that. Mancherry is good for the recycle, especially of just so you guys know, you can get a card with 3 to 5, and she's really strong with Rebecca. Rebecca then getting back the Hina or getting back a 2K is super important because the value that they generally like to swing with is 6. These cards are super impactful simply because they are blockers. Brenu's also super strong because, again, you see him, you get that extra advantage. And then obviously you get to pressure their life with 6 when you activate Hound's Blaze, which is really good. And then we've got our 2Ks to help us counter. Anything that has counter here is also really strong, simply because swinging at 5 might be the way they like to peg you. And if, like, for example, if you can counter an extra Brenu in your hand or something else, it might be value. But these cards are going to be your worst cards overall. They're not going to play generally something unless, like, Zoro, Texan, Ninebeard. Like, then obviously you would move these cards up. And then you'd probably have time for this. But, like, you wouldn't know that unless they played it against you. So it gets a little bit funky. Okay. The same principles basically apply to Law, except for in the matchup, this comes up here. And this card gets a lot better. So Law doesn't have any removal, which means they cannot do anything about this. So when they go to play their blocker Law, this card is going to have immediate value. This card being brought off of the Rebecca, wherever she is, right here, is going to have a lot of value. And then Ice Age. Ice Age is a lot stronger. But auto cycle targets still basically are all cards, but this one, this card now comes up here as the cards that you want to see in the matchup. Simply because Ice Age reduces the Law blocker down to 0, and then, like, Lucci for 5 Dawn, you get rid of 2 cards. Also removing their cards all the time in Red Green Law just basically breaks their game plan. This card is terrible. You should not have time to play this card, but if you do, we will auto win. And these 2 cards have a lot more value, but this card, it should go kind of like this. Like, this card's kind of in between, and then she's like if this is 50% between bad and good, she is definitely up here. But depending on how they play against you, a lot of red-green law players, you'll have time to play this card at least. So, moving on to red-purple law. Most important cards against RP law. This is actually going to be a lot of the same. Counter is always super important. Blockers. Mancherry kind of gets way worse. And then this card is okay. But then these cards all really shine. So again, you should not have enough time to play this card. This card is not going to get the equivalent value of the cost of it to play for your removal. Play it if you need to get rid of something, like if you need to get rid of a blocker and this is you somehow had time to play this is going to become a lot more important. Same thing with this card. Yes, it is good, but you have to establish it, and then they will probably reduce it and bottom deck it. This card is a lot better than this one simply because they can't touch it in your drop or your trash. But all these cards are absurd. The cards that they primarily play are 4, so Great Eruption is huge. Hound's Blaze hits it. This card basically hits every single card in their deck, or mostly every single card. This card blocks all the 5Ks along with this. This is a free block that plays the Hina, which is why it's important. Anything with combo is going to be really good. Rob Lucci is the backbreaker of their deck, and Ice Age, much like Great Eruption, has an immediate value of getting cards down in range. So that's pretty much it for the red-green law. Whitebeard. Okay. Whitebeard is very, very different. Okay. And then these. Okay. I think it kind of depends. This card gets worse. I should probably order this properly, but your 2Ks are automatic. These 2 cards are super important. I'm going to set these off in a small section by themselves. This is good early. This is better late. Better late. They can't do anything about this card generally. Your blockers are obviously super important. Brenu is actually a little bit less important against Whitebeard, but he's pretty good to see on curve. Houndsblade is good for the early, and then Barcelino is probably actually up here. He's probably up here next to this. So I would break the importance down into 3 sections, with these 3 cards being worst cards. So obviously Whitebeard initially swings for 6, so the 2Ks are really good. This card, if it can and it will have the ability to come down, this just makes consecutive Whitebeard 9-beard pressures against you really bad. Like really bad, because you're going to draw into more blockers and 2Ks, while every single 9-beard they turn sideways is now subject to a 2K or a Radical Beam off of this card alone. These cards out 9-beards the easiest, and Barcelino specifically is basically dangerous against the entire deck. The cost reducers are all basically in this order, per se. Basically because this card can reduce the highest cost cards the easiest, all the way down. You're most likely going to play the Hina off of the Rebecca, which has the highest value, and you basically have to commit a turn to establishing this and handling whatever aggression that is. So, for example, Whitebeard likes to go first, play like Izonami, and then like swing 5-6 with that, or play Zoro, swing 5. If they do that, Lucci becomes a lot stronger, but he's generally super bad in the matchup, because then you can swing with leader on 4 Dawn, swing with leader. Then if you have enough cards, especially if you play Brenu first, to basically Lucci them. These cards are a little bit, they're important, but they're a little less important. Houndsblaze is important early, not to say that it doesn't have value, and it definitely has value if you saw a first turn Brenu. Houndsblaze is going to help you get rid of cards. I do not want to see you do this, though. I don't care if anyone tells me that this is good in the comments section. I'll straight up disagree with you every time, and we can just agree to disagree. But the idea that you should Houndsblaze their Nami like turn 1 is stupid. Don't do that. like literally don't do that. Make sure if you can establish a Brenu, like Brenu, Hound's Blaze, to whatever card, like if they play like a Zoro or something, and then like you swing into the Zoro, or yeah, you like attach a Dawn or two, swing 7 at the leader, reduce the Zoro, and the Hound's Blaze the Brenu up to 6 and then swing 6. That can be a pretty solid play. Okay. And with Whitebeard, the numbers that you want to kind of work with are all ties. They have a lot of 2Ks. They have a lot of cards that can basically counter out for them. So you always want to match them so that the 2Ks get the least value possible, or the Rad Beams get the least value possible. Or you want to swing at 4 over so that it costs a Rad Beam and another card. That's generally the math of where you kind of want to get it. Unless you know they play guard point, then 3 might be your number. But like, for example, when they go into play their 9-beard, this card right here has an immediate value because he can swing for 8. This card obviously is 4 over at 8, so this is 12. And then they're going to have to defend whatever that they defend. Lucci. So the reason why these cards down here are all pretty bad. Lucci will not get the full value of removing 2 targets. However, he is a 6K attacker, so he does have somewhat value. But the fact is that in general, he should never be removing 2 cards. He is only going to come down if you need to remove the 1. But the reality is that you're not getting the full value off of him. And yes, you produce a 6K attacker, but you're reducing 3 cards in your drop for, cycling them back into the deck when he should probably be the card that's getting cycled down to the drop for something more important. If he's your only form of removal, obviously keep him because like you're going to need to get rid of cards. And for the record, don't be waiting for 2 cards to come down to KO with this card. If you can solo remove cards, that's fine, right? Because technically you're still going to get this 6K body to establish. But waiting for like a turn where like Ace and Luffy come down so you can get rid of both of them next turn, you don't want to give Luffy 2 chances to swing at you, number 1. And you definitely don't want to give Luffy and Ace a chance to swing when they can reduce like your blockers. Just something to think about. Brenu and Mancherry basically fall into the same category. Mancherry can get back other cards, which is fine. Like, she's really good at doing that. But again, you're going to be primarily occupied by getting rid of their cards. And Brenu, outside of turn 1, basically has 0 value unless you're trying to keep up at hand advantage off of playing with her back on. Ace basically follows the exact same philosophy. But Brenu gets better. Brenu is just a little bit better because he's a little bit slower. They can get more event heavy. But with the new Fire Fist card against Rebecca, it's like low-key pretty nuts. But it's a Revolutionary Army card, so I don't know. But bottom line is that like Brenu gets a lot better because he's a 5K leader. So when we Hounds Blaze whatever they play, it's going to be just really good. You may not have as much time to play this. And that pretty much is the only thing that really changes. Lucci may not get the value either, so it is what it is. And the last card for red that we have to talk about is Bella Betty. And I need every removal card up here at top. The most important cards. Bella Betty is like literally crying. And it definitely goes... Actually, Brenu is over here. And then Great Eruption. Ice Age is terrible. Hina is okay. Kuzan is terrible. Obviously your 2Ks. Every blocker. And Hina probably goes in this order. So, Bella Betty should not have enough cards to make these 2 cards super relevant to play. And every single turn against Bella Betty, you need to be focused on removing the maximum number of cards possible in the most efficient ways. This card is down here. This card is terrible because this is the number 1 card that's terrible, simply because you just do not have a good trade target for this. They don't have a high enough card to justify this card. The only time it's good is when you get to hit it out of life with a trigger. So if it's a trigger, it's insane. But if it's not, it's terrible. If you hit this card and you play this card in your deck and you hit this out of life, you should definitely be bottom decking one of their cards, 100%. Mancherry, she is definitely too slow, and you don't want to see her until you're at 10 Dawn, 100%. You should not have time to play this card. If you do, you auto win the game. Again, same philosophy. They should not have cards. Great Eruption's much better in the matchup. This card can help reduce a 4-0, which is fine, like if you have this in tandem. So it's not the worst thing, but again, it's one of those things where it should be, it's kind of like overkill. Same thing for him. He's kind of overkill, and he has to swing, so you have to put him on the board. And if you're putting him on the board, you're basically not removing things. The reason why Hina is better, because you can play a blocker and play her, and then have a card that is attack pressure and that they have to deal with. Your blockers deal a lot, they carry a lot of the load defensively. So the fact that I can, for example, at 6 Dawn play Rebecca into Hina, reduce something, and play Houndsblaze has a lot of value. At 8 Dawn, Rebecca, Hina, and Lucci with Leader Swing is absurd against the deck. The best card is Rob Lucci by far. A lot of low-cost cards get hit by it. Barcelino hits basically every card in the deck. Houndsblaze is obviously going to come in clutch. Houndsblaze plus brand new is insane. Great Eruption sees a lot more value, both because it generates a card and it's that 2-cost reduction. So against a 4-cost card, it gets pretty iffy. If they have like the Kuma, for example, you can swing with lead, reduce the Kuma, play down Great Eruption, and then Houndsblaze. And then your 2Ks are just going to be necessary to survive the onslaught that they're going to try to bring to you. And then these cards are all terrible. Okay. Next is going to be basically every Lin deck and Katakuri. So in the matchup of cards that are broken, this card's insane, and it's actually probably one of the reasons why I'm going to increase it to 2. Worst card of your deck's Mancherry. Mancherry, it feels kind of bad to say that she's like the worst card. But the reality is that every single card up here, because it's kind of unfair because she's kind of like a recovery card. But again, when you're playing Mancherry in these matchups, it's just against both yellow and black, yellow and Katakuri, it just feels super bad. This isn't in any particular order. I'll just go over each one. So Houndsblaze is super broken against Parasparrow and any of their low-cost blockers, whether this be like Brule or Sanji. You use the Great Eruption and the Ice Age. The Ice Age gets far more... I should just remove the Mancherry. Just set her down here. Real quick while I explain this. So Ice Age and Great Eruption, this is better early, this is better late. For obvious reasons. Rob Lucci is absurd because he can get rid of 2 cards, but you have to have the setup properly to do that. That's why Houndsblaze is going to be a little bit better. Barcelino is going to be good at removing a blocker right away. This is a card that's also insane early because basically they sit there. If they've swung at you like Katakuri, right? They swing at you once, check their life. They ping you down. Or, right, they swing for 5, play Parasparrow, you have free permission to play this card, and then basically say anything you play from there is just terrible. I'm actually going to say that this card isn't as good as well. We're going to have like Kaido and Mancherry just right next to each other. But this card is absolutely broken in the matchup. Being able to just remove their 10-cost mom is like super duper important. Hina and Rebecca are huge, but Rebecca right now is kind of not the greatest. Simply because and Barcelino, they're kind of in this same conversation. Now Barcelino can't be KO'd by effect, so he's way stronger than Rebecca, but they will Thunderbolt Rebecca generally. And that's where she gets kind of weak in those matchups. Sabo is the best blocker by far because he can protect your whole board. And then your counter cards and then your starter. With the Katakuri and Linlin matchups, anytime the threat of Big Mom is a part of the deck, you want to be taking your life early. simply because you don't want, if Big Mom can remove one of your life, it's not that bad. If she removes two of your life, it's awful. And you want to basically focus on control the entire game of getting rid of their board as often as possible, while like establishing your own. So if you can play like Rebecca into Hina and Hound's Blaze, like a card, and get a leader swing and control the board if they like swing at you, you do it. Early, if like on, for example, if you have Hound's Blaze in hand and they play Parasparrow, you do not want to, at 4 Dawn, for example, let's say they get turn 1 Pudding, turn 2 Parasparrow, and you have the option to play Rob Lucci right away. It's turn 1, you Brented, right? That's what you did. And you have now the option to Rob Lucci or just Hound's Blaze the Parasparrow. Which do you think's better? Well, I'll tell you, it's just Hound's Blazing the Parasparrow. You don't want to give them another card. Don't give them another search. You also get another attacker, and then it's a card that they have to swing back at the card with, which you're fine. If Brenu dies to an attack and takes an attack away from you, that's fine. And then you basically just play that grind removal match the entire time. Against NL, most important cards. He's actually insane in this. This is less insane. Barcelino, absurd. Rebecca Hina, late. This is probably one of the worst cards in the deck now. Your counter cards get a little bit worse in NL unless they high roll with Home Oli. And then Sabo. Okay, so Manchuria actually gets a lot better against NL. So let's start with why these cards are kind of bad. So yes, you have this for like their top end, like their 8 and 9 cost Yamatos, and it could just easily out the board, out like a huge part of their board. But it's not establishing a body. And early game, you're going to need to focus on clearing Home Oli. At least you should be, unless they're playing the Big Mom version, which is the worst version. This card is terrible because of Gadatsu. Like, NL basically doesn't want to swing at you early, and then they want you to play a card like this or Rebecca so that they can just Gadatsu the card right away. Why all these cards are good. Manchuri gets really good at getting back Barcelino, which is like probably the best blocker in the matchup. Rebecca into Hina is super strong simply because, and I should say the best blocker in the matchup. Sabo and Barcelino are the best blockers, but they get, they have like, obviously Sabo is like less Dawn efficient, right? Basically for the same thing, but he protects the whole board, so basically she can get Thunderbolted. So if you have 9 Dawn and you play Rebecca into whatever you're deciding to do, and then you play down Sabo next to her, like that's really strong. Now they can't Thunderbolt it, and he cannot be rested by the 3 billion bolts Amaru. So again, he's a little bit stronger. But Hina's going to help on the reduction. This is insane early. This is also insane early. So both of these cards actually have basically equal value because of your ability to help get rid of Home and Oli. At 6 Dawn, these 3 cards, if you see these 3 cards in tandem with each other at 6 Dawn, it does not matter what they play. If you KO both of those cards and they do not reestablish a Home Oli, they've lost the game. They basically have to have 7 and L like pressure you, and if you have the double removal for a 7-drop and L, make them trash a life, you basically can win from there. Brenu is super insane early because of Hound's Blaze, and Hound's Blaze gets a lot better with, along with Barcelino, at helping you remove the higher cost cards, as well as bottom decking cards that can be like if they're KO'd, or cards that they would want to put back into their life as triggers. So just bear that in mind. 10 cost Kaido is absurd. If you see that against Anel, and Anel definitely plays a slow enough game, and you play the Resource Roar Attrition, and you resolve one of these, you're winning. If you resolve both of them, you're insane. And then this card is going to help you combo out of the early home. These cards are going to help you, especially if like the Om is a 6K and Gadatsu 6K. So these cards become a lot more important. Okay. Moving on to purple. I have blue purple Kaido down here and purple Luffy. And we talked about red purple Luffy earlier, so like it's not really worth the mention. But purple Luffy and blue purple Kaido. Blue purple Kaido is actually absurd if you haven't seen it, but you just gotta play against it. Like you'll know that it draws an insane amount of cards. But purple Luffy, the best cards against purple Luffy are all the removal plus the low cost cards to help you get there. Your blockers have probably the worst value of anything in the match of any of the matchups. Your 2Ks are the most important. And then this is a card that they literally cannot get over, but you cannot play this card. Oh god, man, it's so rough. This card is okay. This card's okay. So I'd probably say in like order, these are the best. This is like mid, and then these are like terrible. So brand new is really good, obviously, if you have like Hound's Blaze. But it's not. It's also I guess I can put this up here. I'll put this up here just for now. But yeah, let's talk about why these cards are bad first. You just won't have. You shouldn't have time if you're having to play Mancher early in the early game. It's bad. She's not going to come up till late, and so she doesn't have as much value. Mancher is also again really good against like slower decks. 10 cost Kaido, you may not have time. If purple Luffy high rolls you, this card's an auto cycle. There's like if they hit, for example, on curve, the ulti page 1 into, then they go into 6, they ramp to 7, play Polly, and then following that they go into like either their once they get to 8, they go to 10, and then if they drop double blocker followed by non-cost Kaido or just 9-cost Kaido, that is way too fast for this card. Like everything that I just outlined there is just bad news. Also, because it plays Magellan, you may never even get to this card. If they see Magellan, if you see Magellan one time, you should probably just pitch this card immediately. This card does have value as instant removal, but it's hard to get the equivalent value. The only time it's like super good is like when you know that you need to remove a blocker. In this card, same reason, except for Polly can just get rid of the card. And furthermore, Kaido gets rid of the card. So you play this card down, you won't have the value to get rid of it right away. If they play 7-cost Kid and Kaido, this card gets a little bit better, but it's just kind of mid from there. The rest of these cards are just all pivotal. This card's insane for popping the page 1. Like, if you can punish at, like, 6 Dawn, ulti page 1, it's absurd. You get to remove 2. Anytime you remove 2 cards, it's good. Hound's Blaze is good for removing a card early. If they commit a 4-drop, like if they commit a page 1, and then you can reduce it with, like, this, and then this, and make Burnu a 6, and then make your leader a 6K swing. That's like really strong. This card gets better the more the game goes on. This card is obviously absurd because it's a simple, any of their blockers, period. Swinging this, you just swing 6, make them like either choose a block or combo card, reduce the other of the 2 blockers or that blocker, and then Barcelino gets rid of the card, which is why he's super good. Rebecca Nihina is defense and cost removal. This card's insane because it protects your entire board against Kaido and Polly. This card cannot be KO'd by Kaido or Polly. And these are super important. Again, rules of cycling that I should never see, simply because they have a lot of 6K attackers. There's just no other way to spin it. That's a 1-for-1 trade, not a 2-for-1 or forcing you to take life. Against that matchup, you basically want to stay at 2 for as long as you can. It's okay to take a couple damage. You don't need to worry about it, and then you need to crack back on all the cards and try to get rid of them as fast as possible. Because if they high roll you, like with ulti page 1 into Polly into Kaido or whatever, or like double blocker into Kaido, you've lost. Like if you can't get rid of those cards, like you're just gonna get ran over. Then moving on to blue purple Kaido. Basically, Oh yeah, and Magellan. Hound's Blaze is insane because of Magellan. It's like how these two cards, even this card, it gets a lot better. Just want to talk about this real quick. If Purple Luffy plays like Magellan, these are the cards that you want to see because you just want to get rid of the Magellan without having to KO the card. So, this card, this card, this card. These him early. This can be impactful against like the rampers. This card's going to be, these cards actually get a little bit less good because you don't need to counters early. Your blockers are really strong. This card is terrible. This card is super important. This card's important, and this card's important. So the reason, well, I guess Kuzan's not actually terrible to play. So again, we're going to fan it out like this. Your 2Ks, they're important, but they're a little bit less important because the goal of Blue Purple Kaido is basically to play a lot of high cost cards. In which, while these cards are important for countering, you want to see everything else here. This card is insane because it's going to get rid of the 9 cost, it's going to get rid of the 10 cost cards. This card is your obviously highest reaching removal for bottom deck aside from this one. This card's going to affect the cards early that they may want to ramp with if they play 0-0 or what have you. These are good at reducing the top end. Same thing for these cards. They do have their value, but it's a little bit less impactful. Brennu's early to... it's also really important to be aggressive against the deck. So Brennu into Hound's Blaze is really strong. You have to be careful with letting them KO cards because they're going to ramp. And then Lucci to remove their aggression that they're putting on the board at you. Your blockers are going to be insane because they're higher cost cards. So when they attach a Dawn for Kaido at 6, they're basically going to swing, and then you get to block 6 and then take care of it. And then Rebecca's literally like the worst of the blockers in this, but she can help you get rid of the high cost cards with Hina while still protecting you from it. But if they high roll into all their cards, basically this card is not effective anymore because they can recycle 9 cost Kaidos every single turn and just continuously play them back to back to back to back to back. This card gets worse in the late game, but it's good against the deck if they play the 10-drop Kaido first. And then Mancherry is going to help you recycle the resources to keep on advantage because they're going to draw more cards than you. They can play this card when you're going at 8 Dawn. So, yeah. Moving on to blue, we're just going to go Sakazuki. Every single card in this deck is good against Sakazuki, minus this card. So, yeah. There's nothing else to say. The only time this card is good is if they establish one of these first or the Kuzans, in which it's this is better against the top end, but this is the only questionable card. For obvious reasons. The Sakazuki matchup is really hard to explain. Basically, it's very dependent on who gets what and how you have to play around what you have and what they played. Like that, I mean, there's just no like denying it. Sabo is some things to note. You play this, you win. And Sabo's super strong against protecting all your cards. Everything else is completely dependent. Kuzan, all of it, right? If you play a Kuzan and they like get rid of it and something else, like you're brand new with like a Rob Lucci, then it just feels bad. So I guess this card's kind of mid against the deck. But other than that, everything else has its importance. Croc. Croc, you want to be aggressive early. Basically... everything for Croc here is pretty good. Up here. Basically, it remains the same. They can bottom deck this card with 3,000 worlds, so you play it, draw a card, it just goes away. If they mess their turn into that, that's fine, but it is what it is. This card's also really strong against their top end, so you may want to play that. Lucci is really strong getting rid of their blockers. Your other removals obviously really good, both against the early and the late game. Barcelino gets a lot stronger in the late game. Ice Age is going to be super important because they're going to want to play tall cards like the 10-drop Kaido. And then this is going to be super important in helping you get rid of blockers, which is where Great Eruption gets a lot of value, and Rob Lucci. Your blockers are just actually better than theirs. Because, yes, they can be bottom deck, but they basically have to invest their whole turns into getting rid of your blockers, which it sucks for us because, you know, it is what it is. But we play a removal game too, so it's not like their board's going to be living. Hans Blaze is also super important. I need to make a note of this for the Blue Croc, simply because it can hit the miss all Sunday, but you need another reducer. You can't just rely on a swing from like a Kuzan or your leader swing to do that. Rebecca and Hina into it, even though it seems like kind of a dumb play, you don't want to give them cards that are going to re-out your board. So Manshare is good for the recycle effect of Rebecca if they don't bottom decker. And then this card, these two cards have their value in the late game, and then Brand New is obviously the good early game card. And then moving on to Rosinante. Rosinante is really complicated, but just some things that you have to know that are like super strong against Rosinante. It's literally these cards. Rob Lucci's probably like the worst. Your 2Ks actually get a lot worse in the matchup, simply because while they're good cards, again, they're not cards that you should be auto-cycling. Just don't hear what I'm saying and then start auto-cycling them. But what you need to understand about Rosinante is that Lucci gets definitively worse if they have the Rosinante blocker on board. So you have to play around that. But the fact that he's an auto KO removal means that like Sugar plus like Baby 5 auto dead. So like that's like super strong. Brand New is good obviously because he's your searcher. Mancherries are recycle pieces for the best cards in the deck. Rebecca Hina is going to be really, really pivotal against the more top end of their deck, whether that be Acos Kid, Rosinante, Law Blocker, or their 10-drop Bofies. And then your blockers that can't be KO'd by effects are super strong as well because of the 5-cost X Drake card. Sabo can't be hit by it, but this card can, and Rebecca can be hit by it. So, yeah, those are just some things to note about it. Yeah, and then you will have enough time to probably play the 10-cost Kaido. And if you play the 10-cost Kaido, don't get debated into getting rid of the kid by swinging into it with Kaido. Just bottom deck it with like some other effect first, or try to do that. And that's where like Ice Age and Great Eruption come in, or like Barcelino comes in. But yeah, be wary. They're trying to starve you out of resources. You want to see Rob Lucci super early so you can get rid of like the sugar and the oh gosh, what did I say? Baby 5. And these cards, they only come in later. And then against black, Sakazuki is just the best black deck in the game. Every other black deck, so every single card in this deck is good against black. Why? You have an answer at a wide variety of ranges, and you have a form of removal that every other black deck doesn't, which is just bottom decking. You play your cards more efficiently than they do. You get to remove their blockers in a way that they can't remove yours. So like Sabo and Barcelino cannot be removed by black cards, and your whole board can't be KO'd anymore, which is really, really bad. Whereas you get to bottom deck other stuff, right? So you have that option between this. This is for the top end. This is insane because you play this against black. Basically, everything in this deck is broken against black, but these are the best cards. Just because you get to, again, bottom deck where they have to clap back by removing those cards. First off, like, this is going to be a high-cost card for them. These two cards are high-cost cards to get rid of them, to get rid of anyway for black. But what you have to just realize is that the fact that I get to bottom deck your cards means that every one of these cards gets significantly worse. And that's just why. Even this card. Like, every single card here is way worse because of these cards. And then we're basically going to be playing a lot of the same cards down here. So, these 4 cards are the difference. And the fact that we get access to them is just what makes us better than every other black deck. Not that they can't win. It's just that that's why we're better. But that pretty much does it for my guide on Sakazuki. Yeah, I hope that this makes sense and that you enjoy some of the play lines that I talked about, or a lot of the stuff that I said makes sense from filtering. You know, just to recap, because there's a lot earlier in the video, like, we don't want to be cycling these cards. I can't stress this enough. Don't cycle these cards unless like your hand's completely bricked up. It doesn't make sense. You need to understand the best cards in the matchup and how they kind of like flow together. Like, for example, if like I said, these cards are the best against black, right? So you should not be cycling those cards out of your hand unless your hand's like bricked up with all of them. We talked about trash manipulation, super important. Don't cycle just to get cards in your trash so that you can have stuff for Lucci. Naturally trying to remove cards, you're going to get there anyway with these. Make sure that you're as dawn efficient as possible. And cards that you should have like to auto cycle in the matchup are like the worst cards that I talked about for each color, right? So with these philosophies in mind, I hope you found this guide helpful. And I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for sticking with me this long. I hope you guys had a great Merry Christmas and have a Happy New Year. I'll see you guys soon. And I'm signing off. Laters.